Welcome to the creepy chef's kitchen, where fear is always on the menu. Today's menu features tales marinated in terror, slow-cooked in shadows. Smash subscribe and ring that bell. It's your ticket to our midnight buffet of horror. Now, let's dig in. Tonight's nightmare is served. It was a chilly autumn evening, the kind where the sun seems to set too quickly, leaving you in an unsettling twilight. I was walking my German Shepherd, Max, on our usual route past the local park. The fallen leaves crunched under our feet, and a light fog was rolling in, giving everything a ghostly appearance. As we approached the playground, I noticed two children on the swings. Odd, I thought. It was nearly 7 p.m. and getting dark fast. But what really caught my attention was their swinging. It was perfectly synchronized, as if they were mirror images of each other. I called out, "Hey kids, it's getting late. Shouldn't you be heading home?" They stopped swinging abruptly, in perfect unison. Slowly, they turned to face me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Their eyes, God, their eyes were completely black, like voids that seemed to absorb what little light was left. Max started whining, something he never does, and tugging hard on his leash. The children stood up simultaneously and took a step towards us. Their movements were too fluid, too coordinated to be natural. "Would you like to swing with us?" they asked in eerie unison, their voices flat and emotionless. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, practically dragged by Max, who was more than eager to leave. As we fled, I could feel those black, empty eyes boring into my back. I didn't stop running until we were safely home, doors locked and curtains drawn. The next day, I drove past the park. The swings were gently moving, despite there being no wind. I've taken a different route for our walks ever since. The night shift at the Desert Palms Hotel was usually uneventful. Just me, the hum of the air conditioner, and endless reruns on the lobby TV. But that changed on a sweltering July night. It was around 2 a.m. when the automatic doors slid open. Two kids walked in, a boy and a girl, maybe 10 years old. Their footsteps echoed in the empty lobby. "Everything okay?" I called out, concerned about unaccompanied minors. They approached the desk silently, and I felt the temperature drop despite the Arizona heat. That's when I saw their eyes, completely black, like voids that seemed to draw me in. "We need a room key," the boy said, his voice oddly adult. "Our parents are expecting us." I felt a strange compulsion to comply, my hand moving towards the key cards of its own accord. But a small voice in my head screamed that this was wrong. "I'm sorry, but I can't give out keys to minors," I managed to say, my mouth dry. "Please," the girl insisted, her black eyes seeming to grow larger. "Let us in." The urge to obey intensified, like a physical pressure in my head. I glanced at the computer, desperately trying to break their gaze. When I looked back, the lobby was empty. I reviewed the security footage the next day. It showed me talking to thin air. But I know what I saw, and those black eyes still haunt my dreams. I'd been babysitting for the Johnson family for years. Amy and Mike were great kids, always polite and well-behaved. That Friday night started like any other, pizza for dinner, then board games before bedtime. We were in the middle of a game of Monopoly when the power flickered, just for a second, but enough to cast strange shadows across the room. The kids went quiet, their hands frozen mid-move. "You okay, guys?" I asked, a strange unease creeping over me. Slowly, in perfect unison, they turned to look at me. I gasped, nearly knocking over the game board. Their eyes had turned completely black, like someone had poured ink into them. No whites, no iris, just endless, bottomless black. I screamed, stumbling backward off my chair. I blinked hard, convinced I must be seeing things. When I looked again, their eyes were normal, blue for Amy and brown for Mike. They were staring at me with confused expressions. "Why did you yell, Sarah?" Amy asked, her voice small and scared. "Are you okay?" Mike added, looking worried. I mumbled some excuse about seeing a spider, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick up the dice when it was my turn. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the image of those black, soulless eyes. When Mr. and Mrs. Johnson came home, I practically ran out the door. I didn't babysit for months after that, too shaken by what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. Eventually, I went back to babysitting for the Johnsons. Amy and Mike were the same sweet kids they'd always been. But sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of something dark and empty in their gaze. And I wonder, was it all in my head? Or is there something lurking behind those innocent faces, waiting to reveal itself again? The misty lanes of the English countryside can play tricks on your mind, especially late at night. I was driving home from a late shift, the fog so thick I could barely see beyond my headlights. That's when I spotted them, two children by the roadside, a boy and a girl, no older than 12. They were dressed oddly, like characters from a Victorian novel. Concerned, I pulled over. "Are you all right?" I called out, rolling down my window. "It's awfully late for you to be out here." They approached silently, emerging from the mist like ghosts. When they reached my car, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Their eyes were completely black, no whites at all, like looking into a starless night sky. I felt dizzy, almost hypnotized by those impossible eyes. "We need a ride," the boy said, his voice eerily calm. "Just up the road." Against every instinct, I found myself unlocking the doors. They slid into the back seat, moving with an unnatural grace. As I drove, the silence was oppressive. The fog seemed to thicken, and I realized I no longer recognized the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw those black eyes staring back at me. Panic surged through me, breaking whatever spell I was under. I looked back at the road for just a second, then checked the mirror again. The back seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, but there was no sign of the children. Just empty road behind me. I drove home in a daze, questioning my sanity. But I know what I saw. Sometimes, on foggy nights, I still catch glimpses of those black eyes in my rearview mirror. My wife Sarah and I were celebrating our anniversary with a weekend getaway in a secluded Oregon cabin. The first day was perfect: hiking, stargazing, reconnecting away from the bustle of city life. On the second night, we were cuddled up by the fireplace when a cold draft swept through the room. The fire dimmed, casting long shadows on the walls. That's when we heard it, soft footsteps on the porch. I pulled back the curtain and my heart stopped. 3 children stood there, 2 girls and a boy, perfectly still. They were old-fashioned clothes, like from the early 1900s. But it was their eyes that made me recoil, solid black, reflecting the firelight like obsidian mirrors. "Sarah," I whispered, "are you seeing this?" She nodded, her face pale with fear. For hours, those children stood there, staring at us with those soulless black eyes. They never moved, never blinked. We huddled together on the couch, too terrified to sleep or call for help. As the first light of dawn broke, they vanished, leaving no footprints in the dewy grass. We packed up immediately, our hands shaking as we threw our belongings into the car. We later learned that in the early 1920s, 3 children had gone missing in those woods, never to be found. But surely it was just a coincidence, right? The rain was coming down in sheets, drumming on my car roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. I was driving home from a late-night shift, my windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. The country road was dark, lined with looming trees that seemed to reach out with gnarled branches. That's when I saw her, a young girl, maybe 12 or 13, standing by the roadside. She was soaked to the bone, her long dark hair plastered to her face. My maternal instincts kicked in, overriding my usual caution. I pulled over, heart racing with concern. As I rolled down my window, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene. The girl turned to face me, and in that brief, stark moment, I saw her eyes. They were pitch black, no whites at all, like looking into twin abysses. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "Can you help me?" she asked, her voice unnaturally calm given the storm. I need to get home. She took a step towards my car, those black eyes seeming to grow larger, consuming my vision. My hand moved towards the door lock of its own accord. Another lightning flash broke the spell. I slammed my foot on the gas, tires squealing on the wet asphalt. In my rearview mirror, I saw her standing motionless in the rain, those black eyes fixed on my retreating car. She grew smaller in the mirror, but those eyes seemed to stay the same size, watching me long after she should have been out of sight. I drove home in a daze, soaked in cold sweat despite the car heater being on full blast. To this day, whenever it rains at night, I see those black eyes in every shadow, and I never stop for strangers on the road. It was a moonless night, the kind where darkness seems to swallow everything. I was driving cross-country, exhausted, when my fuel gauge hit empty. Like a miracle, a lone gas station appeared, its flickering neon sign a beacon in the gloom. As I filled up, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. That's when I saw them, two kids, a boy and a girl, couldn't have been more than 10 or 11. They seemed to materialize out of the shadows. Mister, can you give us a ride? We're lost, the boy said, his voice unnaturally adult-like. I was about to respond when they stepped into the harsh fluorescent light. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, but that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was their eyes. Completely black. No whites, no iris, just endless darkness. Please, sir, we need to get home, the girl added, her tone flat and emotionless. Every instinct screamed danger. My hands shook as I replaced the nozzle. Without a word, I practically dove into my car, fumbling with the keys. As I sped away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. They stood motionless, those black eyes following me until I turned the corner. I drove all night, too terrified to stop. To this day, I avoid gas stations after dark. It was supposed to be a guy's weekend, 3 days of camping in the backcountry, miles from the nearest town. Just me, my two buddies Mike and Dave, and the great outdoors. The first day was perfect, hiking, fishing, sharing beers around the campfire. On the second night, we just settled into our tents when we heard it. The snap of a twig, then the rustle of leaves. Something was moving around our campsite. Probably just a raccoon, Mike whispered, but he didn't sound convinced. The footsteps grew closer, too rhythmic to be an animal. I unzipped the tent flap, heart pounding. What I saw nearly stopped my breath. A boy, no more than 10 years old, stood just outside our tent. He wore odd, old-fashioned clothes, short pants, a buttoned-up shirt, and suspenders, like something from the 1930s. But it was his eyes that made my blood run cold. They were completely black, no whites at all, like holes cut in reality. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice flat and adult-like. "I'm cold." A gust of wind extinguished our dying campfire, plunging us into darkness. When I flicked on my flashlight, the beam reflected off those black eyes like obsidian mirrors. "Get out of here, kid," Dave yelled, his voice shaking. I blinked, and the boy was gone. Just vanished. We spent the rest of the night huddled in our tent, jumping at every sound. At first light, we packed up and hiked out, not speaking a word until we reached our car. Later, we learned that in 1932, a young boy had gone missing in those very woods. They never found him. I still go camping, but now I always bring an extra flashlight. And I never, ever open the tent at night. It was another late night at the office, the kind where the fluorescent lights start to buzz in your ears and your eyes strain from staring at the computer screen. By the time I finished, it was well past midnight. The office was eerily quiet as I packed up my things. I stepped into the elevator, eager to get home. Just as the doors were about to close, a small hand shot through the gap. The doors slid open again, revealing a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. He wore a school uniform, complete with a little red tie. "Hey there," I said, confused. "Are you lost? It's awfully late for a kid to be here." He didn't respond, just stepped into the elevator and stood in the corner. As we descended, I felt an odd heaviness in the air, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "What floor do you need?" I asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. He slowly looked up at me. That's when I saw his eyes, completely black, like polished onyx. No whites, no iris, just emptiness. Suddenly, the elevator jerked to a stop between floors. The lights flickered wildly, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. In the strobe-like flashing, I saw the boy's face split into an impossibly wide grin, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. I pressed myself against the wall, as far from him as possible in the small space. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos stopped. The lights stabilized, and the elevator started moving again. The boy was gone, leaving no trace he was ever there. When the doors opened on the ground floor, I stumbled out on shaky legs. The night security guard found me sitting on the lobby floor, pale and trembling. I took a leave of absence after that night. When I returned to work, I always took the stairs, no matter how many flights. Some risks aren't worth taking twice. It was a crisp autumn evening, leaves rustling in the wind outside my cozy Vermont home. I was curled up with a book when 3 sharp knocks broke the silence. Odd, I thought. It was nearly 10 p.m. Cautiously, I approached the door, flicking on the porch light. Through the peephole, I saw 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 12 years old. They wore oddly formal clothes, like they'd stepped out of an old photograph. Concerned, I opened the door, but the words of greeting died in my throat. Their eyes, oh God, their eyes were solid black, like polished onyx. No whites, no iris, just inky pools of nothingness. "Ma'am, may we come in and use your phone?" "We're lost," the boy said, his voice devoid of any childlike quality. "Our parents are worried," added the girl, her tone equally flat. A wave of dread washed over me. Every fiber of my being screamed to shut the door, but I felt frozen, caught in their gaze. "Please, let us in," they said in unison, taking a step forward. That broke the spell. I slammed the door, my hands trembling as I turned the lock. For hours, I heard them outside, alternating between knocking and calling out in those emotionless voices. When dawn broke, they were gone, leaving only dead leaves on my porch. I've since installed security cameras, but part of me dreads what I might see on them one dark night.
Submit your stories to creepychefmedia@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for future creepy content.